Hello, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Happy to have you join us for today's presentation on some best practices around selecting technology in a hurry. Couple quick housekeeping items of note as we get started. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to enter those into the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. And also the slides from this presentation will be available to all of our attendees, and we'll get those out to you over the next couple of days. So just to get things started real quick, I wanted to provide you a little bit of background about Real Story Group if you haven't joined us in the past. Essentially what we are is a research firm, and we focus on digital workplace and digital marketing technology. How we deliver this is in a couple different ways. First, through publishing research and analyzing what these solutions are good at, but probably more importantly for you as a technology user and buyer, what they're not so good at, where they could fall short for you. We also provide advisory services that can take the form of calls as a subscriber with our analyst team, along with some in-depth consulting engagements where we actually come on site and be an extension of your organization as you're going through either a selection project or a strategic roadmap engagement. Finally, we actually offer a tool called RealScore that we invite you to try on our website, where you can benchmark your digital effectiveness and look at some additional ways in which you can really improve where you're at from an organizational perspective moving forward. So as I mentioned, we cover 7 different technology markets right now, and those are listed on the screen. So those typically focus on either digital workplace or digital marketing technology. And why that's important is, since that's the world that we live in, we're able to cover more vendors and provide you with more choices. That includes several open source products, along with some of the key mid-market players that are out there. We've been fortunate enough to work with over 4,000 customers in over 60 countries, and if you're not already a Real Story Group subscriber, we'd welcome the opportunity to earn your business as well. So finally, what makes us really unique in the research world is our independence. What we mean by that is we don't do any work for the vendors that we cover. We don't advise them on the strategy, nor do we accept any sort of pay-for-play sort of model within our analysis. That way, you can be rest assured that you're getting the real story behind what they're good at, what they're not so good at, and we're not beholden to any of the vendors that we cover. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our managing director, Jarrod, and he's going to walk us through the rest of the presentation. Jarrod?
Thanks, Scott. And thank you all for taking some time out of your busy day to join us for this webinar. We appreciate it, as always. So the agenda today is really simple. We're going to start with some disclaimers, and then we're going to get into 6 best practices that we've observed over the years in working with a number of those clients that Scott mentioned, in helping them select the right technology for what it is they're trying to do. So the first disclaimer is that you may have heard us talking about this. It's something that we preach about quite a bit. We think there's a right way to select this type of technology. We think there's a right way to select digital workplace technology. We think there's a right way to select digital marketing technology. We have a kind of we think is a clever little nickname for our process. We call it Real Story Vendor Procurement, or RSVP for short. And what that means is we have tried to codify this right way of selecting technology into 6 phases and about 20 different steps. And this is the ideal way to go pick this technology that we think in some of the most successful projects that we've seen undertaken by our clients have actually followed all or most of these steps. However, let's be honest, we're the Real Story Group, and we like to live in reality. So I just want to say that while we don't recommend taking shortcuts, because you certainly risk some trade-offs there, we know that in reality, sometimes hurrying is something that you can't avoid. in a perfect world, you would invest the right amount of time that was proportional to the enterprise criticality of this technology that you're about to procure. But we understand that some organizations have to speed things up for a variety of different reasons. And in fact, we get inquiries all the time from our clients or potential clients who say, how can we pick a product in the least amount of time as possible? And there's some reasons for that. Some very good reasons. Sometimes there's fiscal timelines that dictate the need to hurry. Maybe you have certain budgeted amount of money that you need to spend, or you lose it by a certain date, and you recognize the need for bringing in new technology, so you need to pick technology before you lose that money. That's the fact of life. That's a very real reason to hurry things up. You might have an incumbent vendor, technology vendor, whose contract is up, and if you're not happy with their services, you might want to look at what your other options are, and you want to make sure you bring something in, obviously, with enough time for you to do that new implementation before that existing vendor contract expires. And then finally, every organization has critical business initiatives in their organization that might necessitate new technology, and you don't want to delay those critical business initiatives any longer than you need to. So you need to sometimes pick technology in a hurry. And this is the real world. This is what happens all the time. And so what we decided to do today is share with you some of the best practices for maybe speeding up an ideal process in a few ways that will still, while not perfect, will still give you the intended results that you're looking for in finding the right fit for what it is you're trying to do. Okay, so let's get into the 6 best practices that we've identified. So number 1, avoid the temptation to scale down your selection team. Now, this is a very common mistake that we see. When you think about who should be on your stakeholder team, if you will, when you're putting together these a team to evaluate the different options in front of you, and you want to make sure that you have a solid representation from your organization. But it's really tempting when you're trying to speed things up to just say, okay, well, this really small group of us, we know what we need. We'll just go make the decisions for the rest of the organization. Or a lot of times the IT folks will say, well, we'll just pick it without involving the business. Or the business folks will say, we'll just pick it without involving IT, because that would just slow things down. It may seem counterintuitive, but actually expanding your team when you're hurrying is a better approach. It can give you, a better view of what's going on in the organization. It gives you the ability to divide and conquer in certain steps of this process, and we'll talk a little bit more about where that might be most appropriate as we go forward. And it's critical that you bring in the real decision makers, because nothing can kill a project more than if you make a decision with a small group of people, and then the real decision makers, the people with the money, the people with the power to ultimately sign off on a potential deal, don't agree or don't feel like you did your due diligence, and they can kill a project really quickly. So oftentimes it's real tempting to slim this team down to go faster, but in our experience, we've seen that you can mitigate some of your risk by actually expanding your selection team slightly. Okay, best practice number 2 is focus on what makes you unique. Now, this is true whether we're doing our full RSVP selection process or speeding this up, but when you are speeding things up, it is absolutely critical that you focus on what makes you unique and less on those commodity features that every system can handle. So the first mistake that I want you to avoid is don't start with this checklist of requirements, this laundry list of requirements. You're going to waste a lot of time up front trying to grab every functional piece of feature requirement. What I want you to do instead is focus on which features and functionality, which feature state would actually describes what makes your situation unique, and really aim to describe that in a set of use case scenarios, very customized use case scenarios, sometimes called user journeys, that really paints a picture of what it is you're trying to do. Now, here's an example from a digital asset management scenario that we helped build for a client. But what I wanted to show here is you want to make it real. You want to make it real in describing the types of actors involved in the process. You want to describe real environments. You want to describe real types of content. And you want to describe real processes. Now, the trick here is to be descriptive enough to explain what you're trying to do to different vendors without being overly prescriptive in how they should solve it. You know, you want to give the vendors enough wiggle room to say, here's how our solution best meets your needs. And this is where I want you to spend most of your effort in coming up with a way to describe this situation to potential vendor partners. You know, there's plenty of time to do detailed functional requirements as part of an implementation, but when it comes to picking the right technology, this is the level of detail I want you to get to finding the right vendor partner. Okay, so once you have those scenarios, you're going to use them to test a potential partner's fit at multiple stages in a selection process. So once you get to the right shortlist, and we'll talk about that in a few seconds, you're going to use these scenarios to test their fit in a way, in an RF something, and we'll talk about whether that should be an RFP or something else. You're going to test their fit in a series of demos, and finally test it in a series of head-to-head pilots. And we'll talk about that as we go along, but these scenarios are so critical. Do not skip the scenario development phase, because that is the only way you're truly going to be able to test a potential partner's fit. Okay, best practice number 3 is let's create a shorter shortlist, but a better shortlist. And it's really hard to come up with a shortlist these days. It's always been hard, but I feel like it's getting harder and harder. You know, this is the world that we live in. This is our kind of famous or infamous vendor map. You know, each of these lines representing one of the marketplaces that we cover. It aims to show, you know, what we're constantly monitoring on a daily basis, but it presents some good and bad news for you as a buyer. The bad news is that there's a lot of options, a lot of overlap in different vendors trying to offer the same solutions or claiming that they can claim that they could solve the same problems as each other. The good news is that you have options, and as a buyer, it's always good to have options, whether you're looking at suites of solutions from some of the big name hubs, if you will, on this map, or looking at more of the best of breed solutions on the outer lines of these subway lines. So how do you come up with a better shortlist? Well, here's how we recommend it to getting to the right shortlist to our clients. The number one thing that you can do to start paring down that marketplace is to find technology solutions that were fundamentally built to suit the use case challenges that you're trying to accomplish at your enterprise. So here's an example from our Real Quadrant shortlist generator that we offer to our subscribers, and you can try it out on realstorygroup.com if you'd like. But what we encourage our folks to do here is to self-identify with which use case scenarios align with what you're trying to do internally. So if I look at things here, these are digital asset management examples, but there are different use cases in all of the areas that we cover. But in digital asset management, for example, are you trying to do basic brand management, or are you trying to do multi-channel publishing? In digital asset management, industry tends to be a pretty strong discriminator as well. So we ask you to choose your industry scenarios, and then use that to pare down your priorities. So once you choose the scenarios that are most important to you, we asked you to kind of rate the importance of these, so that it adds up to 100. But if brand management is more important than multi-channel publishing, you could skew these weightings. You could also weight the importance of certain strategic considerations related to the vendor, the product, and the product's ecosystem. And once you do that, you get a visual representation of some vendors that are potential good fits. So this is an example real quadrant from some digital asset management scenarios that we plugged in. Don't pay too much attention to this, because the beauty of the real quadrant is it changes dramatically based on the scenarios that you tell us are more important to you. But the idea here is, if this was a real quadrant that was returned to me based on my criteria, I should use this to create a short list that is most relevant to me. So I would look at the vendors that were the best scenario fit and had the best strategic consideration fit, and then start to do my due diligence on these guys. So you can pare down your short list to knowing right away that you're only looking at vendors that are fundamentally built to achieve the same kind of scenarios that you're trying to achieve in your organization. And there's a lot less wasted time there by having a 10 to 12 vendor shortlist that you're trying to make sense of. So get that shortlist down to 3 or 4 ideally, and then do your due diligence. All right, best practice number 4, skip the RFI and formal RFP and go right to what we call an RFD, or sometimes an RFP&D. All right, lots of alphabets going on there, and we call this a little bit of RF mania. But when you're going to market to find the right vendor partners, you need a vehicle to go to market, and that typically takes place with an RF something. So sometimes organizations start with an RFI, or a request for information. Some organizations require that you send out a request for proposal, where you get a series of proposal responses back, and then you decide who comes in for a demo. Some break out a separate RFQ, or request for a quote phase, and some organizations go right to an RFD, which is a request for demo. We recommend that you consider an RFP&D if you're going about trying to shorten this process and do it and make a decision as quickly as you can. What I mean by an RFP&D is, I want you to send out a request for proposal and demo. So what you're basically doing here is grandfathering your shortlisted vendors into the demo phase. We call it an RFP&D because we want you to still get a proposal that includes pricing and a project plan and whatnot, but we don't want that to be a separate step in the process. We want them to come to the demo with the proposal and all ready to go. We also, when you go about this approach, you can tell the vendors that they've been shortlisted, tell them that you've done a ton of work up front getting the right shortlist, and tell them that they've been invited to the demo. Vendors tend to take that as a sign that you're more serious and you're looking to, that they see that you've done your research, and they're more likely to put more effort in responding and more likely to respond. It's very common that not all of your shortlisted vendors actually choose to respond, but your rates of response tend to be higher when you grandfather them into the demo phase. The demo phase that I'm referring to is something that you never want to skip. This is still really, really important here. But if you're doing this in a hurry, you're going to want to, more than ever, make sure that you structure your demos in a way that ensure that you're not wasting the vendor's time, and more importantly, not wasting your time. So you certainly want to establish firm timelines and rules. You want these to be really tightly scripted, and you want to make sure that vendors don't come in and try to give you their canned demos that they give to everyone else. We want to make sure that you see your use cases in action. So here's an example of how we work with some of our clients in structuring these demos. You want to make sure each of the vendors who come in to give those demos have the same rules given to them, the same timings. Very little time for introductions and technology and company and technology overview, because you've already done your homework up front. that's what this process entails. You've done your homework. We want to see now in those demos, we want to really spend all of our time, or most of our time, the bulk of the time, getting into the demonstrations of how their solution can meet your use cases. It's really important that, so you can see in the middle there, lots of time on demonstration of use cases, not a lot of time on telling us about their company and whatnot. Next step is constructing a proof of concept of just the right length. So again, when it comes to doing these types of selection processes, we always recommend a real structured demo week, and we always recommend that you do a proof of concept. We always say, ideally, you do a competitive proof of concept, but this is a step that, again, you don't want to skip, but there are ways to shorten it and speed it up. Okay, so what I mean by a competitive proof of concept is at this latter stages of the process, when you've windowed down your shortlist to your finalists, we will ideally take your last two competitors and mimic a real selection project as much, a real implementation project as much as possible. So what you want to do is go back to those scenarios that we talked about creating at the outset, pare them down a bit, and say to your finalists, we want you to lead us through an exercise where you, again, mimic what it would be like to work with you in an implementation project, and show us what it's like to actually implement these scenarios in your system. So again, the key here is make it real. So use those real scenarios. Maybe you're using real content in the proof of concept. Maybe you're using your real people to actually test the tools and understand what it's like to work with these systems, and use your real environments as much as possible. Now, these can be resource intensive, but again, the most successful projects that we've ever seen done have gone through a proof of concept phase. Now, if you need to speed this up, there are a couple different ways that we can do this. So one is you can do, if you choose to do a competitive proof of concept, you can do them concurrently. So if you do want to do them in parallel, you have two teams, two vendor teams working on the same project at the same time. We've seen this be successful. It can be difficult on your internal team to bop back and forth between the two groups, but it is possible. You can certainly shorten a proof of concept. Again, I don't want you to skip a proof of concept, but you can shorten it. You certainly take on a little bit more risk the shorter you make these, but we've seen them done as short as 3 days. We've certainly seen them as long as 3 months, but this is kind of the risk balance that you want to take into play here. What you don't want to cut out is, having at least a half day of hands-on training. You don't want your users just to be using getting their hands on the tools and not knowing what to do and what's been built out and what's not been built out. You want the vendors to kind of lead you through that. One other approach to kind of speed things up that we've seen is we've had business and IT stakeholders branch out a little bit, and sometimes the business team works with some of the project-based team from the vendors, and then the IT stakeholders work with the technical folks from the vendors, and they have different tasks that they're looking to accomplish as part of the bake-off. And then other ways to speed it up is, while we often recommend that you choose technology first before you pick a technical integrator, sometimes we will recommend that you pick the integrator and vendor together where it makes sense. And if anyone has any questions about that or would like to learn about how we recommend you going about that, we'd be happy to talk with you offline on that. And then finally, we want to get to best practice number 6, which is don't wait to negotiate. I mentioned our ideal process that we look at here, and it's true in any case. We see people tend to wait till the end of a selection process to start negotiating, and even maybe it makes it more critical to not make this mistake when you're in a hurry, because vendor salespeople are pretty savvy. They know when you're hurrying, they know when you're up against the wall, they know when you have money to spend and a timeline to spend it. So you give up a little bit of your negotiation power if you wait till the end. So instead, what we recommend is you start negotiating as soon as possible. So as soon as you start thinking about those demos, as soon as you get any proposal back from the vendors, we want you to have some back and forth. We want you to challenge what the pricing costs. We want you to challenge the project plans. We want you to challenge the assumptions that they're making to give you these costs. And there should be a lot of back and forth. So, as you get on site in the demos, there's going to be a lot of time for you to learn more about them, but also for them to learn more about you. And as they learn more about you, you want to challenge them to refine their pricing, so that, because they're not guessing, they're really learning about what it is they're getting into. So they should be able to refine, so that you're moving closer to an agreement as you go through this process. And price and value is always a key consideration here in picking the right product. So that's something that we don't want you to divorce from the selection process as much as possible. So in summary, here's the 6 steps. Certainly avoid the temptation to scale down your selection team. Focus on what makes you and your situation unique. Create a shorter, better shortlist if you can. We want you to skip the RFI and RFP and go right to an RFD or an RFP&D, if you will. We want you to construct a competitive proof of concept of just the right length that you're willing to take on. And then finally, don't wait till the end to negotiate. With that, we'll wrap up. We do have a question or so coming in here. And one question that is from Anne. Anne asks, how do we learn how to use a system well enough to do a proof of concept? And does the vendor help, or do we just wing it here? No, and the key to doing a POC well is to really make it as close to what you're going to experience in a real implementation project as possible. So what I like to do here is I like to give much of the control to the vendors themselves to lead you through this. Right, so you tell them, okay, here's the time frame we have. Here's some ideal check-in points along the way. Here's the scenarios that we want you to build out, and then you ask the vendors to actually lead you through this process, just like they're doing an implementation, because this is how it's going to be during implementation. They're going to lead you through this type of thing. So what happens there is not only does your team get a chance to actually use these products, try them out, use their real content, but you actually learn a ton about what it's like to work with the vendors themselves and the people on the implementation team, right? You get to assess their project management people, you get to assess their technical people, you get to assess their user experience people or whatnot, and you should never underestimate those learnings that come out during a proof of concept such as that. It really is enlightening and is the best indicator that we've seen about predicting what's going to happen in a future implementation phase. So thank you very much, all of you, for spending some time for this, and thank you for your kind words. Some of you, we definitely appreciate it. I would encourage you, I mentioned this tool, Real Quadrant, which we work with our clients to get the right shortlist. It is free to try. You won't get the full results, but you'll get a real good sense of the criteria that we recommend using as your primary discriminator in coming up with that shortlist. Just go to the realstorygroup.com/tools and click on Real Quadrant. You can also, as always, get a sample of our research. You'll get an entire chapter from our research, and you'll see the deep dive evaluations that we do. And we hope that's useful to you. And as always, if you want to connect with us and reach out to me, my contact information is here. I'd be glad to have a conversation about what's going on in your situation and see if we can help. So again, good luck. Don't rush it too much, but do your due diligence, and we hope you select the right product in the end. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.